It's the movie that pretty much fathered every science fiction movie to come after it. That's right, today we're talking about the 1968 sci-fi classic 2001 A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick and written by Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke. And today I have with me as a guest co-host my sister, Jessica.
Hello.
Alright, so this is going to be an in-depth review and analysis of 2001 A Space Odyssey, which means we're going to be going through every category of my grid. So the first category is going to be writing, plot, and genre. So I guess I'll start off. I was a little bit admittedly harsh in the writing categories, just because as much as I like a lot of the things going on within this movie, it didn't necessarily fit my ideal for a movie. I tend to very much so like movies that focus on characters. That is not what this movie is.
It's not focused on characters.
No. So I was a little bit harsh, but its only fault within that regard is that it didn't meet what I want to see. It's not that it's bad. I just wanted to get that out in the open, that I know I'm a little harsh and that I know it's very subjective.
Sure.
I did definitely appreciate the things that it did within genre. Definitely, like I said at the beginning, I felt like it, very much so fathered a whole. I mean, there were definitely science fiction movies before it, but I feel like there's a very clear mark of, like, once this movie came out, it changed everything, specifically for that genre, and even outside of the genre. So I really liked the different things that it did, as far as just the themes explored and different kinds of tropes and imagery especially was really big as far as just setting the standards.
I think that's the big thing about the writing in this movie, is that it wasn't focusing on trying to be any particular anything. I mean, genre protocols are just completely out of the question with this movie. It's just like doing its own thing, and it has a pretty clear plot progression that leaves a lot of people going, what just happened?
For sure. Yeah.
But it's only because it's a weird and unusual plot. It's not hard to follow, and it doesn't have holes in it. There's not a lot of things where you're going, how would this work, or how would this happen? It all kind of makes sense, but at the same time leaves you like, what? And it leaves you with so much to discuss. And I feel like there are so many intentional things done to make you fall into a discussion and thought patterns where you're like, what was that about? Like, what is happening here? So I thought there was some really strong writing in that regard. The only thing I didn't give a 10 was pace, which I think a lot of people have trouble with the pace of this movie. I didn't give it, a terrible score. I gave it an 8 for the pace.
Yeah.
I can deal with a slow movie. I like a slow movie. I have the patience for a slow movie. But they're even that being said, I have a very high tolerance for slow movies, and there are some parts in this movie. I mean, at the beginning of the movie, you weren't even sure if it was starting or not.
True. I was like, that did happen.
Yeah.
That was the thing that happened.
Yeah, so that maybe, that's part of the pacing issue there.
Yeah, I didn't give it a very good score for pacing. I also have a pretty high tolerance for slower movies, but I think for me the key is, like, if it's about characters and it's more like, well, they're not really doing anything, but it's a character study, I can deal with a really slow movie in that regard, because I like people watching, I like analyzing behavior, like that's more my speed. So is the more, it's definitely, I liked the themes explored. I liked a lot of what was happening. It definitely left me thinking, and, it's, I should probably say off the top of my head, or off the top of the review, I had never seen it all the way through until today. I'd seen probably about half of it in various classes and stuff in school. So this was my first time seeing it all the way through. And there were
Isn't it funny how when you've never seen it before, you almost feel like you have seen it before, because it's so immersed in pop culture and every movie that has come after it. Science fiction anyway, or certainly any movie that takes place in space.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And even just silly pop culture. There was one point where I was like, oh, is this why this music plays in that Simpsons episode?
I've seen this scene in The Simpsons!
Exactly. Yeah. So, definitely it comes up quite a bit, which is fun. But the pacing, When it had my attention, I liked what was happening quite a bit, but there were definitely a few points here and there where I was like, okay, this is going on a little bit, particularly in the last act when it's, gets into the Jupiter space and it's like, just feel like I'm on acid or something. It's like, this is going on a little bit too long for me.
So I don't know if this is, the right part of this to talk about this, but there's definitely parts of this movie and scenes of this movie where I feel like I'm not watching a movie so much as I'm watching something that you might see in an art gallery. Like when you go into a room and they're just playing something on a loop, I feel like that is something that was kind of just getting onto the art scene in the 60s, when this movie was made. So yeah, it's hard to score it on writing when it's just doing something like that that's so different than, there's a non-linear storytelling, like...
Right, it was very, very avant-garde, very... I took an avant-garde class and hated it because it was basically that scene I was talking about where he, enters Jupiter space. It was a whole semester of watching short films that was just that. It was...
Sometimes the comparison I make, though, with a movie that is, really... I don't feel like this movie is completely non-linear. I think it's a fairly linear movie, but with movies like that get more avant-garde, I almost tend to think of it more. So, if you have, if you're judging the writing in a book, there's something very different about the writing in a novel versus poetry, a book of poems or something like, and some movies tend to lean more towards this isn't really about the plot that you would find in a novel. This movie is it's almost the different segments are connected to each other, but it's kind of loose. It's almost like a few short stories that are connected to each other kind of tangentially.
Very much so.
And certain profound symbols are showing up in each one.
For sure.
So you see the same symbols in each one, and then you kind of get, these little pieces thrown out where it's like, oh, this is happening because we needed to send you this because of this thing that happened in the other scene, but it's almost like an Easter egg more than it is actually important to the scene that you're watching. That's more about broader themes that don't really have anything to do with the plot.
For sure. It's almost like Dubliners in Space. I don't know if you ever read Dubliners.
No. I don't know what that is.
It's the same guy who wrote Ulysses. Why am I forgetting his name right now? Which I've not read that. But
obviously this is an actual piece of literature that I've just never heard of. Okay, well, go on.
It's all good. But it's a compilation of short stories that all take place in Dublin.
Okay.
And they're all very separate, but they're, a character from this story will show up here, different things here and there. But that's all. So it's similar in that way.
Yeah. But you didn't like the writing so much because it wasn't focused on characters.
It's just not my preferred approach to storytelling. I wouldn't necessarily say I disliked it because I like there's definitely themes of I don't even quite know how to put I know what I'm trying to say and I can't even think of the words. A circular kind of a... you have the dawn of man, and then you have the space age, and they're not. And then there's a regeneration, exactly, and it's time and civilization,
a new discovery, and
exactly. So it's
facing the unknown.
Exactly. So it's not linear in the sense of you start here, you continually evolve. It's circular.
Yeah.
I like those themes a lot. That's definitely, I like the more philosophical ideas and questions that it presents. I got a lot out of it, and I like it,
But you're just more interested in, what's going on with these characters. Which, actually, I didn't sit and think, as I was watching that movie, who are these people? I don't know what they want. But then when I was filling out this grid and there's categories like character development and character arts and characters' inner needs, and when I stopped to score it, I'm like, well, actually, probably the biggest character of them all is the Dave. They just call him Dave most of the time. We know him as Dave because that's what Hal calls him. But he's probably the most main character there is in the movie.
Sure.
Do we really know any of his why did he go to space? He talks to his parents in one scene. We can't even tell if he likes his parents or not. Like,
yeah.
And I don't necessarily think it hurts the movie or that I sat there thinking it was a negative point, because kind of like we were talking about how the movie's about these really big, broad themes. It's not about him, you know?
Sure.
He happens to be the character we see the most, but it's kind of like not necessarily a movie about him. I mean, he's not even in half the movie.
Right, you could just as easily say the main character is the
other guy who went... the apes, yeah.
Yeah, or Hal, or, you know, you can pretty much pick any character. They probably all have about the same screen time.
Yeah.
I mean, Dave has... I guess they all have names, but his name is, like, repeatedly said several times, and so we have a better... And same with Hal. I think that's why those scenes are the most memorable, is because we have characters to attach to it. Because I thought, I mentioned I had seen a lot of clips in class, and I thought most of the movie was Hal and Dave, and that was the movie. I think it's
probably what people remember the most. And honestly, I think Hal is probably the one, not the most memorable thing in the movie, but definitely one of the things that really sticks with people. And I think that's interesting in talking about characters too, because he's like this artificial intelligence, and people are watching the movie, and the humans in the movie are doubting, you know, whether he is actually incapable of making mistakes or not, whether he actually has ill will towards them. Is he like sentient and hates them or something, or like is he manipulating them?
And they even question very early on, like, does he have emotions? Like, no one can really say.
No one knows. So it's like this big mystery about whether he's even good or bad or has feelings or not. But all of that being said, when he is getting, you know, everything pulled, and you're like hearing him speak, I felt sad for him. You know, I felt like he was a character that I cared about.
Yeah, it's a very uncomfortable feeling when he's like, I can feel my mind going, stop. Like, I can feel it. It's like, that sounds awful.
It's meant to make you uncomfortable, and like, yeah, but was he doing that just because as a computer he knew that was what would make the humans stop?
Right. Like, was it a play on empathy? Like, no, I'll be good now. I'm fine. Yeah. I was just... Yeah. Something went a little out of whack. It's fine now. Like, this is what they want to hear. I didn't mean to accidentally murder you all.
Yeah. It's just weird and really interesting. But should we go to the next category?
Sure. We've kind of already gotten into characters a little. Before we do that, though, should we talk about the total scores we gave for plot and genre?
Okay. I wasn't... We kind of were going around. I wasn't really sure what section we were even on. For writing and plot and genre, it averaged out to a 9.6. I gave everything a 10 except for pace. So that's what brought down the average for me.
That's fair. I was a little bit harsher. I gave it a 7 out of 10. Definitely the pace. I only gave it 4.5 out of 10. The pace really...
Some people just can't handle it.
I mean, I wouldn't say I couldn't handle it, but to be fair, you were on your phone a few times. So I think you had a little bit more trouble with it.
I gave it an 8. I know it's not a 10.
Fair enough.
Writing for characters?
Yeah, I guess I was
we kind of talked about it already, so you can talk about the score for it.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much. I'm just looking over the score to see if there's anything I want to add. But yeah, I think we pretty much covered everything. Do you want to give your total for writing characters?
Mine came out to a 9.
Wow. They were more generous than me. Although, like I said at the beginning, I was harsh because it's not...
Even though I recognize for a lot of these things that, like character development, character arts, I still gave those 9s because, quite frankly, I don't feel like it deserves a super low score for not having a lot of those things because it's just not necessary. I think it would have been fluff for this particular film.
That's completely
That's not what they were addressing.
Right. Yeah, you like that it wasn't...
Yeah.
That there wasn't
focused on what they needed to focus on. Yeah, they gave... This was already almost a 3-hour-long movie. They used their time. Stanley Kubrick, he really... was responsible for everything on this movie. He decided very specifically what he wanted to use his time on, and I think he made wise decisions and told the story he wanted to tell.
That's fair. I went significantly lower. Mostly, again, I I recognize everything you're saying, and I agree that, you know,
it's just not your bag.
Yeah, like, I agree that this movie's not about characters, and you like that about the movie, and I penalized it a little bit more just because it's, like I said, not my bag. So I gave it 5.8 out of 10, which I know is harsh, and I know that, you know, I recognize there's a lot of really good things going on within this movie that I like a lot, but I like characters. I would have liked a little bit more. And maybe that would have made the movie worse. It probably would have, because obviously this movie is a classic, and everybody who sees it, you know, loves it, so I don't know, maybe I should have given it higher, but 5.8 for me.
Sure.
Alright, so now we're going to move on to the next category, which is going to be acting and casting. This one was a little bit hard because, like we were saying with characters, like, we really don't get a good grasp on any of these people. Like, a lot of people, I'm like, did that person even have a name? Like, it's hard to say, like, oh yeah, this performance was really outstanding, or, you know, it's a little bit difficult. But I really liked the acting and casting overall. We talked about it as we were watching the movie. I should have looked up his name, but the actor who plays Dave, he just has a very modern look to him, and a very, I thought he had just kind of an everyday Joe look. I mean, he's still a Hollywood star, but, you know, I thought that was a good mix, that they were, I mean, obviously they didn't know he would look modern when they cast him, but there's just something about him that stands the test of time, that he, even, you know, all these years later, he still just has that, like, everyday Joe appearance that just kind of makes us relate to him, even though we don't see him that much. I know the same was true with most of the characters, so I liked the acting and casting overall.
I thought face acting was an interesting category, because when I started thinking about that and reflecting back on the movie, there's actually a lot of face acting, particularly from that actor. He does not have a lot of dialogue, and he spends a lot of time in long, tense scenes, you know, just sitting at the controls of his spaceship, trying to, you know, save his fellow astronaut, not knowing if Hal is, like, trying to kill them all, and if he can even stop him, you know, and he stays focused, because he's, like, you know, like, strong, stable astronaut, and he's like doing this, like, emotionless thing where you can tell that he's scared. Yeah. You can tell just enough that he is scared. So
I agree. That I gave the face acting category a 10, mostly, and also because of him.
So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was also going to say in the bonkers last scene of the movie. There's no speaking in that at all. And he is the only actor there. And, you know, it's a lot to take in. It's a lot of weirdness and a lot of what the heck. But he gets a lot of credit for face acting. Absolutely. There. The only thing I dinged this for was for casting of secondary characters and extras. Because, now, of course, this is in its time. It was 1968, so there's only so much that you can blame it for. But I didn't want to let it completely off the hook for diversity. Although I was impressed with the representation of women.
I was too.
On the international, or was it internet, whatever their space station was when they were first going to the moon.
Yeah, the women outnumbered the men.
There were more women than men in that particular scene, and then I don't know what their, like, jobs were supposed to be or anything, but they were definitely plenty of women. And then when he was addressing the, like, boardroom or whatever it was, talking about like the secret and the cover-up, there were a couple women in that room who, you know, were among, like, this elite class of people getting the information. So that was great, but I don't think there was a single person in the whole movie that wasn't white. So
yeah, it was definitely very white.
Not a whole lot of people in the movie, but enough that I would think you'd see somebody who wasn't white.
You would think, sure. I did want to mention, I guess this would go, I wasn't really sure if this would be considered secondary characters or extras.
But it's hard in this movie. There's like 10 people in the whole movie.
well, but that goes into what I was going to say. The apes in the beginning, or the ape men, like, just the physicality, and, like, it's easy, like, except for in the scenes where you get the really close-ups on their face, and you can definitely see a little bit more.
It's funny because for most of those scenes, you're watching it and you're going, are these gorillas or are these people? And then you get those couple of scenes where it goes, like, way Planet of the Apes, and you're like, oh yeah, these are people. Yeah, for sure. But most of it's pretty impressive.
Really good. So it's definitely, we'll get more into that with costumes, of course. Yeah. But just the acting there was pretty amazing. And I don't know how much of like the noises they were making, if those were actors.
They might have incorporated some actual.
Yeah,
I don't know. I haven't read about it or anything.
Yeah, I don't know. But I just thought, I feel like it's easy to forget that those were actors, you know?
Yeah,
and like I said, I don't even know, like, extras, secondary characters, I don't know, but...
Well, in that main, like, iconic scene where he's got the bone, he throws in there, like, you can't really tell.
It's amazing,
you know? It's really, like, there were just a couple scenes where it was like, man, did they just have, like, a different mask that day or something? Because it was like, wait, like, suddenly this looks really bad. But for most of the scenes, it looked incredible.
It was really amazing, yeah.
So my overall for acting and casting was 9.2.
Actually, so was mine.
Wow, look at that. So cinematography and lighting.
All right, do you want to, should I lead the way?
Well, I'll let you lead the way because I feel like this is a category, well, maybe this isn't me leading the way, but let me just say, I feel like this is a category where I'm like, I just don't really like pick up on that much of that. Like, I love movies, I love watching movies, I love critiquing and criticizing movies, but there are definitely some parts of filmmaking that are over my head, and I feel like lighting is getting really specific. But that being said, there are definitely, like, some of the things in space where the things are lit certain ways and you're seeing, like, when everything's lining up and then, like, you know, the camera moves. Those are really, like, iconic shots, and, like, lighting is a big part of that. Yeah. And so kind of because of that and because of just the overall, like, cinematography being amazing and just so iconic, I gave this whole category 10s across the board.
That's fair. I actually... was very similar. The only downside, or the only things I didn't get a perfect 10, beauty, I gave a 9.5 out of 10.
Really?
Nothing was ugly, like, nothing was bad. You didn't
think it was beautiful?
I did think it was beautiful. It's very hard for me to push something into a 10. It has to really be something that I just really like, wow, that was perfect. And I just, for some reason with the beauty, I didn't quite feel, it was very close, 9.5 out of 10.
I think almost every single shot of outer space in this movie is just gorgeous.
See, and I would agree with we'll get to, I don't want to say too much because we'll get into this in the next category, but more of the compositions and the camera movements. Yeah. That's gorgeous all throughout. I would definitely agree with that. But as far as the lighting, and since this was my first time seeing it all the way through, it's entirely possible, you know, if I watched it a second time and paid a little bit closer attention to specifically the lighting, it's entirely possible I would be like, no, I was crazy, perfect 10, you know. Yeah. But with the first viewing, it was more about the framing and things like that for me.
I see you gave storytelling a 9.9. I
think that's actually
really specific. Oh, is it a 9.4? It's
supposed to be a 5. I don't know why. That really
I'm like 9.9. There must have been something really specific where you're like, I'm taking off 1/10 of a point.
No, that's not what happened. I seem to have added it correctly. That really does look like a 9.9. It is a 9.5. I think I might have been thinking of a 9 or something, and I wrote 9.9 but knew it was 9.5 when I added it. I don't know.
Well, anyway, you still averaged pretty high. I
still did. I still got a 9.8. Mm-hmm. So it's very close to perfect, and there's really nothing that I can say like, oh, well, this is specifically why I knocked it down a little bit. It just didn't quite hit perfect for me. Like, I can't really explain why. It just, my gut feeling and just my, you know, perception with a first viewing was that, like, it just wasn't quite there. Mm-hmm. But and it could just be because the camera work overshadowed the lighting, that it felt that way to me. It's hard to say. But regardless, 9.8 out of 10 for me. All right, so then that leads us to the next section if you're ready to move on.
Go ahead.
And that's going to be the cinematography, camera work. Mm-hmm. And this one, similar to you with lighting, I gave it perfect 10s.
Yeah, I mean, you can't deny that is like one of the things that makes this movie as iconic as it is.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's definitely, I think that's what makes it, particularly like in hindsight looking back, I think that's why it's been so timeless, is because you can still watch it and be like, oh my god, that looks amazing. And even some things where
we kept saying, like, how did they do that? They didn't even have CGI. Right. Oh, it blows my mind. It's amazing.
Yeah, so it definitely, I mean, it stands the test of time. It looks amazing. You just got like crazy eyes for a second.
I'm just so excited.
I know. Yeah, but yeah, so for sure, like there's just no fault. And even things like camera angles, like there are times when it's like you can't quite tell what's up or what's down, and it's like, well, it's space. It's irrelevant. There isn't really an up or a down, so there's a lot of like really tilted angles, and yet you can't really, normally that would be called a Dutch angle, where the camera tilts and like the horizon's on an axis, but there's not a horizon, so I don't even know if you can quite call it. I mean, I don't know. I'm getting
it's
really
so unique.
nerdy.
There's probably not terms for a lot of the things they did.
Exactly. So I just really liked the use of the camera and the frame and all the iconic things, and just there's just no flaws. So yeah, it didn't quite get perfect for lighting for me, but camera work easily 10s down the line. Same for you then?
Oh yeah, it was. Yeah. I guess I thought that went without being said. Absolutely,
yeah.
Perfect 10s for some cinematography camera work.
All right. So that leads us to editing and special effects. And this is another one where, I mean, even just the editing is, I mean, there's the very, very iconic scene of the bone being thrown up, and then it's the space station. Like, that's one of the most famous edits in cinema. It's just, like, even the editing is iconic, and that's...
And that special effects is even in this category. I mean, like, special effects is, like...
Absolutely. That's...
just jaw-dropping.
I mean, I think we could talk about that for, like, an hour. Yeah. Just that one portion of this category, because it's so... Like, it really... Even, like, some stuff where it's like, oh, well, they used models. Like, I know that's how they did it. But it's like, but it looks so good. And the movement.
Honestly, better than a lot of CGI movies made today.
Absolutely.
For certain scenes, anyway. I mean, it's just like, this looks... You could put some of those scenes in a movie today, and it would still...
Absolutely.
Work just fine. I mean, it's amazing.
There's a little bit of green screen where it's like, oh, that was obviously a green screen.
Yeah, not every single scene, but there's definitely, like, certain shots where you're just like, whoa, like, this is perfect. It's perfect.
Yeah. So the only thing that I knocked down within editing... I know it's a little redundant because it's more so with the script than the editing. But the pace.
It still comes into the editing because one of the scenes where pace was the biggest problem for me was when he like goes into like the time warp, that when he finally gets to Jupiter at the end. He's in that stinking warp for like
it's forever. That was the biggest one for me too.
And of all the special effects in that movie that would work for today, that one looks really hokey today. So, which is neither here nor there with what we're talking about right now. But for that particular, and maybe that's why I was more bothered by the pace in that scene. It was just because, like, it didn't look as good. It wasn't pretty. Right. Whereas the pretty ones, I'm like, I'll look at that for 10 minutes. That's fine. But that one, I was just like, oh my gosh, just get there already.
For sure.
So, I don't know. But I recognize that pace is... I hesitate to say it's a problem in this movie, but, like, it's definitely makes it... a challenging movie to watch, and there are some scenes that could have been a little bit shorter. So I didn't give it terrible scores. I just gave it what did I give it? I gave it a 9 instead of a 10 for continuity / pace, which is really just for the pace. And for overall editing, which was really just for the same reason.
Fair enough. Similarly, I had all 10s except for pace, which I gave an 8 instead of a 10. So that should make both of our scores a 9.6 then.
That's what it
essentially
is.
Both. Yeah. So, pretty much it sounds like we both had the same issue, just the pace. So then the next category, moving on down, is going to be sounds. And this one is definitely... a lot of 10s in this one as well.
Yes!
For me.
Oh my gosh, let's talk about the sound. So, of course, the score or soundtrack or whatever you want to call it, obviously he used a lot of classical music that was not scored specifically to this movie. But actually, I read that there was a score made for this movie that got rejected for this instead. And that, people think that this works better. I think this was in something written by Roger Ebert, if I'm remembering right. I don't know. It was when I was Googling some stuff, but
Your pace was a little slow.
Yeah, it was probably when. Yeah, it was probably when he was getting to Jupiter. I was reading about this, but like they Stanley Kubrick was like, no, like this doesn't work because it was a typical movie score with emotional cues in the music.
Oh, and that wouldn't work.
You didn't want that, yeah.
Right.
And this is like something that like stands alongside what's happening, but it's not tied to what's happening, and it does kind of give you that sense of wonder or that sense of just like, you know, when they're in space and it's like do, do, do. Like it just kind of gives you that like, oh, this is fun, like it gives you the mood, but it's not like, you know,
like, you should feel sad now.
And then of course, so besides the music being amazing, because I mean it's classical music that's completely inseparable from this movie at this point. Then you also have scenes with silence and scenes where you just hear him breathing. It's so tense and dramatic that way, and also I think really influential for movies going. I mean, how many other movies have you seen now where you just hear them breathing, or where the thing explodes in space and it's a moment of like it just goes silent. I mean, that stuff comes from this. So it's when you know, this like showed how, you know,
how to do a space movie.
Yeah, how to do a space movie. Yeah, it's just done so well. The sound is really, really very good reasons to give it 10s across the board for sound.
Absolutely. I also like it's interesting that it wasn't originally scored to the classical music, because to me at least, I thought it carried those themes of like the cyclical nature of civilization that it was kind of going after, because of this very classical,
like really old music showing up in this futuristic scene. Yeah,
which
that's
is
a
just
good
great.
point.
Yeah, so I liked that too. And yeah, just to reiterate, silence in space is just, any movie that doesn't do it is doing it wrong. Like
it's the tension of just hearing him breathing. It's like you feel that, and it's like you can tell he's just like, hold it together, and like you're sitting there in your chair watching the movie like, hold it together, like it's so suspenseful.
Absolutely. So yeah, easily I think it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, I think both of us gave it perfect 10s overall for sound design. Or sounds. Yeah, it's definitely one of the best sound designs I've ever heard in a movie. It's just phenomenal, and just does such a good job of, like, regardless of dialogue, like just between the score and like you said with the breathing, like the sound effects, like just that you can almost strip the movie of dialogue. I'm sure you could. What do you mean almost? Like you could strip the movie of dialogue
for sure.
And get the same exact story.
You don't even have dialogue for like probably, I mean, I didn't time it, but I would not be surprised if it was like the first 45 minutes.
I don't think it's, well, probably at least 30, because I think the scene with the apes is about 20 minutes, and then you get to the space station, and then it still takes a while. So
yeah.
And then the last act is, another 20, 30 minutes. Yeah, like half this movie, if not more. Yeah, good stuff. So yeah, perfect 10 out of 10 for both of us for sound. So moving right along to the next category, which is aesthetics. So this one, I probably should have told you this when we were filling it out, but I kind of consider it to be like character aesthetics, which would be the hair, makeup, and costumes, and then the more environmental aesthetics of sets, props, and locations. I gave this one very high scores down the line.
Okay, we need to talk about this one.
Okay.
Well, okay, the one thing...
Oh, yeah, we do need to talk about this.
The one thing that I gave the lowest score out of anything on this whole grid was hair, because when you saw those little segments where they're like video chatting with their families back on Earth, I was just like, this is a 60s movie. Yeah, so like there's so much of this movie that it's like timeless. And then when you get a scene like that takes you out of it, it's like, ugh. So
I had forgotten about that when I did that.
I think it's fortunate that this scene hardly showed anybody on Earth in like regular clothes or anything, because the more you see of that, the more it just loses that timelessness that you get from seeing them in space and in their space costumes and stuff like that.
Their space costumes.
So yeah, the hair just took me out of it. Now, initially, I started out giving lower scores for like hair, makeup, costumes because of the 60s effect and the datedness effect. And then I realized that there's a bad kind of being dated, and then there's also the fun retro kind of being dated, where it's like, yeah, this is a 60s movie where you have a Pan Am stewardess serving the guy in space. It's wonderful. Yeah. It's so good, and she's a Pan Am stewardess with her little outfit, and it's like, it's so 60s, but you're not like cringing at it. You're like, that's amazing, and it's like funny, and it's kind of. Maybe he didn't mean it to be tongue-in-cheek. Maybe he really thought that was what the future was going to be like. But
it's not that far-fetched if you think. Like, it seems more likely that a commercial airline would go to space than, like, the military.
I suppose. Back then it probably seemed that way. Yeah. I don't know. I just think it's really fun in this, like, sort of, like, I don't know, just, like, pop art sort of, like, retro vibe where you get these, like, I don't know. That stuff was fun, and I love the, so, like, it's unbelievable, of course, that this would actually happen in 2001, because everything does look so 60s, but, like, all the attention to detail, and he wanted everything to be so, like, accurate in the space travel stuff. So you've got these, like, 60s space sets that are just fun in the 60s-ness of them. So even though they're kind of dated, I wound up, like, bumping it up more than I initially was going to, because I was like, I actually like some of this datedness because I think it looks really cool now. You know, it's part of the movie. Like, absolutely, it wouldn't be the same movie if everybody was out there in like the space outfits that you would see in a futuristic movie today. It wouldn't be the same. Yeah. And then for things that are not involved in that, like sets and locations, props, I gave 10s for those.
Oh yeah, the environmental aesthetics, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of that comes in even with just like we're saying with the models and stuff. I know that's not really falls into this category, but just everything holds up so well over time, and just like you said, the attention to detail within, the sets especially, and even like the props about all the different types of food that they eat. That's not that much different than actual astronaut food. I mean, it is.
There was really enormous attention to detail that we cannot even possibly notice. Like I was reading that, like, because of course there's the leopard at the beginning, the very, very beginning. Well, apparently the leopard is like a theme throughout the movie. There's like leopard lapel pen, or like leopard cufflinks. I mean, on one of the characters, and who would even notice that? And it's these are I don't know. And that's kind of part of costumes, even though you don't even see it. It's cool,
right? Absolutely. So I gave higher scores than you across the grid. I wasn't really thinking about the humans on Earth when I was thinking about like hair.
It's hardly in the movie, but I just popped in. As soon as I read the word hair, I'm like, oh god, those Earth people had such bad hair.
Sound like a racist alien or something.
Yeah, their hair was really bad.
It was bad, and I do remember, like, as soon as that scene came on, I remember being like, "Oh, there's the '60s."
Yeah, there it is.
But I wasn't even thinking about that when I did the grid. The one thing that I knocked points down for a little bit, I gave 9.5 out of 10 for costumes, just because of little things like, which I think this goes into what you were saying of like, well, it's dated, but it looks cool. But I still kind of took a little bit of half a point off. It was like the hair helmet thing that she was like, what? Like,
it didn't make any sense at all.
It didn't make any sense. The only thing I can think of is
I think they were just protecting their beehive hair. Like, I don't know why.
Well, and if it was anti-gravity, like, I guess your hair would go crazy.
I don't know.
But just put it in a ponytail. Like, it's...
They didn't do ponytails.
Well, this was the 60s. A bun. Something.
They weren't hippies. Well, even these are Pan Am stewardesses.
A beehive would probably stay in place.
I don't know.
Pretty good.
Those helmets were weird.
They were a little silly.
Another thing to talk about with makeup. So there's really only, at least that I can think of, there were two main uses of makeup beyond just the normal like stage makeup. And that was the ape scenes, which, so, like, that was mixed. I feel like about, like, 75-80% of it, you're like, are those actual gorillas? And then you got the weird Planet of the Apes stuff in between where you're like, whoa.
Like animatronic beak-like
It was
mouth.
really bad, yeah. And, so that was kind of, like, a little wonky. And then the other use of makeup was that when you saw him old at the ends, I felt like they were working so hard to be like, he's old, can you see? He's old and wrinkly. I mean, he just had wrinkles like...
Yeah, at first I thought he was, like, in fact...
diseased or something. Yeah, he didn't just look old. He looked like...
now, because I thought, like, we saw him.
He looked like a lizard man.
I thought
it was just, like, really bad.
I thought he was diseased, though, because I thought he was, like, him present-day diseased, and then he sees himself old.
He was just aging, as far as I am aware. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it looked like he was drying out.
Because when he first got there, he was regular age. You looked in the mirror, he's kind of wrinkly, and then he's, like, even more wrinkly, and then he's lying in the bed dying with, like, no hair, and he looked like...
He looked like a burn victim or something.
He looked like what's the movie where he ages backwards? And
Benjamin Button.
Yeah, when he's like born an old man and it's this weird little like CGI like man and he's like, I'm a baby but I'm an old man. That's what it looked like. It looked really bad, but anyway, that was not the greatest makeup. You have to judge it in its time. I mean, obviously, like, we've gotten a lot pickier about this as time goes by, but I still just think it looked really bad.
Yeah. Well, considering I thought
you thought he had a weird space disease or something.
I thought he was, like, dehydrated and his skin was cracking.
I'm pretty sure he was just aging.
I guess that makes sense.
I could be wrong. But then because nobody really knows what was happening there.
Yeah,
but
it's true. I mean, that would make sense.
I think he was just aging because it was like...
Why did he look so much better when he was eating food then? Because he didn't look bad then. He wasn't all super wrinkly. He just had, like, gray hair.
I think it was just because of bad makeup. Yeah.
Oh, I should have.
Because I think when he first saw himself, he was in the spacesuit and everything, so you could only see his skin. So they're like, we have to show them that he's older, and they went cuckoo bananas with the makeup.
Yeah.
And then when he aged the next level, you could see his hair and his like cloak, and they're like, oh, they know he's old. We don't have to do all those wrinkles again.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but that's kind of what I got
makes
from
more
it.
sense. Because, yeah, it is like a progression of age, obviously. So, yeah, I really wasn't thinking too much about it. I just thought he was, like, super dehydrated.
Well, I mean, it was a long flight.
Yeah, he was in that time travel acid trip for a long time. Well, now I kind of want to... Is it too late to, like, change stuff on you? Because I gave 10s for hair and makeup, and now I want to, like, lower it.
See, I had good points. Yeah.
Makeup
definitely had some...
Makeup for sure. Hair I'm going to keep.
Hair is, iffy, but
this I'm gonna
definitely have some criticisms for that makeup.
I'm going to put that to a 9. God, now I got to figure this out without a calculator. 48.5, but I can't do that in my head.
What is 48.5 divided by 5? 9.7.
Alright, that seems fair.
So impact on film. Oh, should I give my average on aesthetics?
Totals?
Mine was 8.2.
That's not bad. And then mine, as we just said, 9.7 after making a quick change.
Yeah.
Was... Well, who cares?
Maybe hair didn't really deserve a 4, but I had to give
4?
I had to give something a bad... I was really offended by that hair. I just didn't like it.
It was very...
I couldn't give everything 10s.
Yeah, it's fair, it's fair. It was harsh, but it's
harsh but fair. I know the makeup really probably deserved worse than the hair, but I just did not like that hair. It just... Yeah, anyway, enough said. Okay, so now impact on film?
Yes, now we can move on to impact on film.
Considering this is like one of the most impactful movies ever made... Yeah. I mean, 10, 10, 10. Critical impact, I know it was a little bit... It took a warm-up before people kind of, like, all got on board. It had split reviews at first, but I think, I think it's pretty well, like, regarded across the board at this point. And, audience cult impact, obviously, it's extremely popular, and historical inspirational impact. I mean, just like we talked about how it's like, we practically knew the movie without even seeing it. I mean, absolutely. It's extremely impactful, so 10s.
Yeah, I agree with everything. The one thing I did... audience cult impact, I did give it an 8 out of 10. Only because, like, yes, it's extremely impactful. People who love it, and, like, critics love it, filmmakers love it, like, it's inspired.
But it's kind of love it or hate it, yeah.
Exactly, like,
Sure.
it's definitely, like, you know, it's not the kind of movie you can just invite anyone over and watch, and so I feel like it's a little bit too niche to give it a perfect 10 for audience cult, even though I know it does have, you know, people who love it, and it does have, you know, there's a large number of people who like it, but it is such a polarizing
I would say that it's not the most, like, accessible movie in that it's, if you're, like, a film lover or, like, you really are interested in film history or, you know, like, this, that, and the other thing where, like, you're kind of, like, in that niche, like, you're gonna love it and you're gonna recognize it for the impact that it has had. Absolutely. Even if you're not that into it, you're gonna be, like, amazed by the special effects.
Absolutely.
And understand that this is of, like, cultural importance. But if you're not that person and you're, like, thinking it's slow, like, you're just gonna be like, this is not for me. You're not gonna be into it at all. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
fair enough. All right, so mine averaged out to a 9.33 out of 10.
Okay, very specific. Very specific.
I know. You gave it perfect 10s.
I did.
All right. So then that brings us to the next category, which I am very curious about for you. It's going to be overall enjoyment.
10.
10.
It's
wow.
a 10. Yeah, which I gave it a extra credit thing at the end, and when we get to that, I'll get back more into why I gave it a 10. So let's hear about yours first.
Now I feel kind of bad. I only give it a 6.5.
I don't expect everybody to like it as much as
That's
me.
fair. That's fair. I gave it a 6.5.
That does seem low for a serious movie watcher, though. This is an important film.
And I reckon, like,
I'm just kidding.
It's
you
true,
can like
though.
what you like.
I know. Well, I liked it a lot, and I like you were saying, like, I appreciate the impact it has and the references.
You
like,
thought it was boring.
At times.
Yeah.
Not throughout. I mean, if I thought it was boring, I would have given it, like, a 2 or a 3. Like, I liked it a lot, but there was definitely, like, probably at least once within each vignette or whatever you want to call each section, at least once there was something where it's like, okay, this is going on a little bit too long. So, you know, it wasn't throughout, it wasn't consistent. I liked a lot of it, but it just goes back to that pace. It was just, even, like, I have a high tolerance for slow movies. I don't dislike them. It just pushed my boundaries a little bit too much. So I gave it a 6.5, which it seems a little low now that after we've talked about it, especially. But really, I mean, it's more like I appreciate
that was your gut reaction when you filled this out very shortly after watching the movie.
I know,
so.
and I still hold by it. Like it's like, I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily say I enjoyed it, but I do like if the question was overall appreciation, easily a 10 out of 10. But if it's enjoyment, I wouldn't necessarily say I enjoyed it, at least not consistently throughout. So that's why it's a little. Now I'm just over-explaining because I feel bad, but you know.
Well, okay, let me talk about mine.
Okay.
You don't have to feel bad.
Okay.
And it's okay if you think my reasons are dumb. That's fine. Okay, I gave it a half a point of extra credit because that was the most you said I was allowed to give it of extra credit.
Well, for one thing.
Okay, well, I wrote down, I was trying to put into words what I'm giving it the extra credit for. I wrote down for symbols and potential for literary analysis.
That's fair.
It's full of, like, symbolisms and big questions and like major themes and these things that pop up from scene to scene. I mean, the biggest thing, like, obviously everybody is wondering, well, what the heck does the monolith even mean? Like,
Absolutely,
what is this thing? What does it mean? Why does it show up in each scene? There's all this stuff with the book tie-in that Arthur C. Clarke wrote. Like, it just makes me want to just, like, dig in, find articles that people wrote, talk to people about what they think it meant, what they got from it. Like it just, I love a movie that you can discuss at length for days after you watched it, that you can write articles about, that you know, you can actually, like, pull stuff from just like you would a classic novel. So
especially, I mean, this is a 50-year-old movie that you're still able to go in, and people are still talking about it, still trying to figure it out after 50 years. Like, what other movie has that kind of a legacy?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's good stuff.
So I'm obsessed with that, and I'd seen this movie before several years ago, but now that it's fresh in my mind again, I'm probably going to be Googling stuff about it for several days to come, because I just find it like so fascinating and fun to talk about, and that's what really makes me marvel at a filmmaker, because when you start getting into these things like I was talking about while we were watching it, I'm like, there's so many circles in this movie, and times where they're walking around in a circle and they wind up right where they started from, and then this movie, like, he ages and winds up as a fetus, and it's like this whole like circular, and it's like, and then when you start noticing a theme like that, like, you notice the big ones first, and then you start noticing these tiny, you're like, oh, that was a circle. Oh, and
absolutely.
He did that there. Oh, and this music goes in a circle. Oh, and it's like, he thought of all those things, and that just blows my mind, and that's what I'm just like, wow, like, this is such a good movie. So not like I'm saying anything new here, but Kubrick's one of the best. They know, but I mean, I'm not trying to downplay what you're saying. But that's why I get a 10 for enjoyment, because that just really, really makes me enjoy a movie, and like, that's what I find fun. So
that's fair. So I gave it one total point of extra credit for two reasons. The first is similar to what you were saying, in that like, it's something different than like, at the time it was something different, and and even now, like, it's influenced just about every science fiction movie to come after it, and yet you can still like watch it and be like, but this is still different than all those things that came after it, even though it's so clearly influenced by, like, it's just, and a lot of that comes from like the symbolism and the themes and all that stuff that you were talking about. Like, it's just different. Like, how often can you say that about a movie? It's especially one, like I said, that's been around for 50 years, and you can still watch it and be like, that was so different than anything I've ever seen before, and anything I will ever see again. Like, it's just, so even though it did get some points knocked out in writing because of those differences, and because I didn't necessarily, not that I didn't like it, but didn't enjoy it, I guess. I still recognize that it is very different, and I like that, and I wish, and it's not to be, I was gonna say I wish more filmmakers would make films like this, but that's not really fair to say, because it's the studios, it's all about money, and I mean, I get it, how, like, if this movie came out in theaters today, who would go see it? Like, it would be a very small box office hit, probably. I mean, sometimes there's weird movies that make it, but whatever. Like, it's, it all comes down to money, which is unfortunate, because you miss out on things like this. So because it's just so different, I gave it a half point for that, and then I gave it a half point, which kind of ties into how influential it is, so I guess it's maybe double dipping a little bit, but just all the homages that you can watch a movie as serious as this and be like, I've seen that on The Simpsons. Like, it's, maybe that's a bad example. But. And serious homages, like you get a movie like Moon, which is almost so much of an homage that it's copying it, and yet it's so ingrained in like what science fiction even is, that you can I hate to use the word copy, but like, you can mimic these elements like so closely and still make a completely different movie, and people are fine with it, and they're like, oh, that robot's pretty much just like Hal, and these people are hibernating pretty much just like they did in 2001: A Space Odyssey, but it's still a totally different movie, and that's fine, because they're just kind of referencing it, and it's like almost like paying respects instead of copying. So so before we get into the total scores, is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Any theories? As you mentioned, nobody knows what the monolith is. Any theories? Talk about any of the symbolism? Just throwing stuff out before we wrap up.
I mean, I don't know. Like, that's such a. I mean, what do you think the monolith means?
Oof, I should. Why did I not see that coming? You just seemed so ready to talk about it. I mean, it definitely. I mean, it's an alien artifact that's meant to, like. I mean, it seemed almost like we have that satellite in space, right? That like has all the different pieces of Earth, and it plays like classical music and children laughing. Do you know what I'm talking about?
It's not orbiting the Earth. It's going out into space as far as it can go.
Yeah, I didn't mean.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. It's a golden record.
Yeah. So I almost feel like the monolith is somewhat similar to that, where it's trying to get, like, someone's trying to communicate with us to show us this. So
it's interesting.
Maybe.
Well, I read a little bit about the book. Okay. And apparently the book explains a lot more than the movie. Like, explicitly explains things. However, Stanley Kubrick was very adamant about, like, well, just because it happened in the book that way, it doesn't mean happen in the movie. There's differences. But, like, in the book, it's kind of spelled out. And I don't want to get into all that at the end of this, because, like, it's pretty lengthy.
Sure.
But, like, I'm not so interested in, like, the whys and hows of why it's actually there. It's more about, like, what it, like, represents. Like, why does it show up at these times? And, like, what does that mean to the story? Like, it seems to always, it seems to always show up. I think I don't know. It seems to represent, like, the great unknown. And, like, the everything that is so unknown that we will never figure it out. We just won't. We're not going to. And I think maybe a little bit of, like, a search for God or a search for a creator. But it's like this thing or entity or feeling that isn't really actually accessible. But, like, you get really, really close sometimes. And so there's these moments where they, like, approach it and touch it and see it. And it's, like, so profound. And then it changes everything. There's suddenly some big transformation that occurs because of it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's more to it than that. But, like, I think that's, like, a big part of it that, like, I don't know, that as far as, like, how it moves the story forward each time it shows up, that kind of seems to be, like, a big part of it.
Yeah.
The end of the movie blows my mind, though. Like, I have a hard time, I don't know. The first and second acts, I'm, like, so on board and, like, wanting to, like, write papers and stuff about it. And then the third act happens, and I'm like,
yeah,
I don't know. That one
it kind of gets into, like, 60s psychedelic or something.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, and a lot of people. Okay, here's another question for you. Okay. Do you think this is an optimistic movie or a pessimistic movie?
I don't think it's either necessarily. It just seems to.
What about, like, when the movie ends? The ending of, like, the movie has ended. Does that final scene and final shot leave you with the feeling of optimism for what has happened? Or do you feel like something good has happened or is about to happen? Or do you feel like something terrible has just happened?
I think it's irrelevant because everything is cyclical. Like, it seems like the fetus is looking at the earth, and I feel like you could easily start the movie over with the dawn of man. Like, the fetus is looking at the dawn of man, and so it doesn't really matter if anything's good or bad because everything's just going to keep repeating.
That's actually a good, yeah.
Maybe, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But
no, that's okay.
I guess that could be pessimistic in that, well, nothing really matters and it keeps repeating, or it could be optimistic and then it's like,
it's
rebirth,
just going to keep
beautiful.
Going, and it's interesting. Yeah.
So I guess
I actually kind of like that neither one sort of look at it, because some people see the movie and think, like, this is terrible, like, he has just, like, had his life ruined. Some people think that the fetus is out there and, like, is gonna, like, destroy the earth. I don't know.
Oh, I don't think so. If anything, it represents, like, a new life. Like I said, circular, it's gonna be
it looks happy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look malevolent. Like, it looks like, oh, I'm gonna be bored. Like, I don't know. It just looks like, it just leaves you with I don't know. I think it's optimistic, but I also find optimism in, like, observing just like nature and just like how amazing it is that anything actually works, and like the fact that we're even here in the first place. And I kind of think that that's maybe part of the optimism that like they even like show the dawn of man, like that it's just like, isn't this crazy? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And isn't it crazy that we're going to space now? So I think there's kind of an optimism in that in a way.
I can see
but
that.
then there's also the pessimism of like, we're getting to this place where we're destroying ourselves, but is that just the circle of life and it's fine? Like,
sure. Well, it is definitely, I mean, it starts off with the dawn of man, and you see obviously this ape-like, we're just playing ape behavior, and then it, you know, flashes forward to the space age, and it's very,
I also think it's so crazy that there seems to be this feeling in the movie that that they're like, we are so dependent on technology, when they're, particularly when they first show them on their spacecraft going to Jupiter, and they're eating their nasty food, and that you watch them eating the food forever. Like, there's this emphasis on like, isn't their food disgusting? And they're just eating their gross space food, and they're watching their like news on an iPad essentially, and then there's like screens here and screens there, and Hal's watching them here. Like, that seems like something you would make now.
right, absolutely.
How dependent were they on technology then that he was coming up with this? Like, just like, that blows my mind. But
yeah, it's very, anytime you can watch an older movie like that, it's like, oh, it's really predicted. Like, I mean, Star Trek
it's
is very,
just like,
yeah.
It seems like an article that you would like see when you're scrolling through Facebook now, and it's like, kids today, they've got a screen here and a screen there, and they're eating their junk food, and it's like, here, they made it
TV
50
dinners.
years ago.
Yeah.
When 50 years ago, when they were still celebrating stuff like that, it's like, isn't this amazing new technology? They didn't even like, they hadn't even kicked out cigarettes yet. Like, it was, they were just like, they thought everything was like so cool. And he's like, guys, you're really dependent on this technology. Like, I don't know. I think that's crazy. Anyway.
So my total score came out to an 88.13. Most of the deductions came from things like pace and things like that I realize are very subjective. You know.
Mine was a 96.1.
That's a good score too.
Yeah. I feel weird scoring it all, and we both know like this is like a masterpiece of cinema. Like, absolutely. I mean, obviously it's like one of the best movies ever made, but according to your rubrics, I gave it a 96.1.
Well, that's extremely close to a perfect score.
Yeah, it's a good score. I've never scored anything else on it before, but I have to imagine that that's pretty high.
That's pretty high. Even an 88.13 is. I've tried to be a little bit more harsh or a little bit more critical. So that's part of it too. I might be overcompensating, trying not to be overly generous, but that's definitely, that's still a score that I consider to be, you know, outstanding. That's definitely well above average, getting close to that perfect range, but there's just some very subjective things and very, very specific to my taste that keep it as a little bit lower score. Because I agree. This is one of the best movies ever made, and the only reason it didn't get a higher score for me is personal preference, which I freely admit. Like I know it's subjective.
I'm sure there are classic movies that I don't like. So
Bonnie and Clyde, make fun of me for loving that movie.
I've never seen it.
I don't like it that much. All right, well, I guess that wraps this up. I don't know when I'll be posting this, so I don't know what movie I'll be reviewing next. But I guess that's
She'll let you know.
I'll let you know. All right.